Now, with the end of the 24-hour deadline issued by Israel, all eyes are on the likely assault into Gaza. Israel's leaders have declared that Hamas will be wiped off the face of the earth. Hamas will be turned to rubble. There have been enough statements that have come out from the Israeli establishment. And Gaza will never go back to what it was. All coming in from Israeli authorities. But before this invasion begins, let's have a look at how Israel and Hamas forces fare against each other. Now, currently, the standing Israeli army has 169,000 troops. And since the war began, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, have called on 460,000 reservists. Add that up, and that is the total they have at the moment. On Hamas' side, nearly 16,000 armed militants are expected to fight off Israeli forces, and another 6,000 Islamic Jihad militants are also expected to join in. Total that, and you'll know what is up against Israel. Now, Israel is going to execute a tri-service assault on Hamas in Gaza. For this, a ground assault, an air assault, and a sea assault is planned into the Gaza Strip. Israel is going from all fronts. Ahead of the likely Israeli ground assault, Gazan civilians have been asked to evacuate southward from North Gaza. Israel Defense Forces are likely to deploy tanks, infantry and artillery across the border, and Israel is also prepared for urban warfare against any and all Hamas presence. Now, Israel's real challenges begin post-troop deployment in Gaza. Hamas Al-Qassam brigades are notoriously famous for using explosive devices in the battlefield. Now, Al-Qassam brigades are essentially the armed group of Hamas, and ambushes are expected as the war is taking place in a densely concrete setup. Hamas can also deploy a sniper network on the rooftops of Gazan buildings. There is going to be complete guerrilla warfare because Hamas, as far as numbers are concerned, is completely outnumbered. They don't have the artillery, they don't have the numbers, but they are still not backing off. Gaza's infamous tunnels are also expected to play a vital role in this conflict, and Hamas can also repeat its 2014 tactic of laying out anti-tank mines on the roads leading to Gaza. For Hamas, on the other hand, the evacuation of civilians becomes an impediment as it gives Israel a free hand to pound Gaza with heavy artillery. With essential supplies such as food, water and electricity cut off, Hamas militants will have to survive extreme conditions while fighting the IDF. And Israel's air superiority continues to be a decisive factor in this fight, as Hamas militants can be bombed with ease from a distance once civilians evacuate from the area. All right, for more on this, we have with us Colonel David B. Deroche. He is a professor of Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. Welcome to World DNA, sir.
Howdy.
So let's start right off with this. Now, Hamas doesn't even have a tenth of the force compared to Israel, but they still haven't backed off. What are they relying on? What kind of tactics do they have? And what kind of support do they covertly have? Because they haven't backed off. And if you look at the numbers, there is no comparison between both sides.
Well, so when you give those numbers for the Israeli forces, only a fraction of those will be deployed against Hamas. So, Israel's concerned that there might be another intifada on the West Bank. They're concerned about Hezbollah firing over from Lebanon. As a matter of fact, the Hezbollah-Lebanon consideration is probably their greatest threat. So I would say that a majority of those 400,000 troops are going to be deployed elsewhere. But the bigger issue is when you move into a city, particularly against a group that has had a lot of time to prepare, you move to a position very quickly of tactical equality. So you can drive tanks through cities, but the main gun on a tank can't elevate to a 6-story building. It can only elevate so high. And forces that are dug in there can counter very effectively even a modern mechanized army. You take heavy casualties fighting in cities. The second consideration is even if Israel manages to deploy its firepower, to say they get fired on from a building, they destroy it. Hamas is determined to ensure that there are civilians in those buildings so that what will be a tactical victory for the Israelis will become a strategic defeat as the news photographs of dead Palestinian civilians are broadcast around the world. So this is a very, very challenging, difficult task, and it's going to be hard for the Israelis. It's going to be extremely hard.
Colonel, now the 24-hour deadline which was given, then there was a 6 hours extension, you can call it that. It's not enough for 1 million people to move with all their belongings. Do you feel Israel is going to wait it out? Is this more of a threat more than action, or are they ready and they are going in? And also talk to us about how Hamas is, I mean, it's being claimed that Hamas is preventing people from leaving Gaza because those are the human shields that they need for themselves. So talk to us about what to expect from this invasion.
Yeah, I think that Hamas will seek to keep the population in there because if the population evacuates, then Hamas's tactics for years has been to intersperse themselves among the civilian population. There's videos all over my TikTok feed and my Twitter feed of rockets being fired from the middle of densely populated areas. We've seen weapons being stored in schools and mosques, things like that. And the command and control centers are typically in multiple story buildings. So if Israel attacks the building, you also displace, potentially dozens or hundreds of families. So what Israel wants to do is say, okay, fine, everybody get out of here. I think it is impossible for 1.1 million people to leave with their possessions. I think it's very difficult for 1.1 million people to leave with their lives. But Israel is trying to maintain some degree of discrimination and proportionality. But I think they understand at the end of the day that Hamas is not going to voluntarily cast aside its greatest defensive value, which is the threat of severe civilian casualties when Israel takes action against them.
Colonel, I also need to take your thoughts on this. Now, Saudi Arabia you can say that they've suspended normalization talks with Israel. Is there a fear that there will be some kind of support coming in from the Arab nations for Palestine? And along with this, on the other hand, US has positioned another one of its superior USS Eisenhower strike groups next to the one that we already had. There is a lot of weaponry out there in support. What kind of retaliation do you feel would be coming in now that Saudi Arabia has backed off from any kind of normalization with Israel?
Well, I never felt that the Saudi-Israeli normalization talks were really going to go anywhere. I always thought that was just something that the Saudis engaged in to make the United States happy. I don't think they were expecting anything to come of that. I don't think that the U.S. forces, particularly the naval groups, will be directly involved in any action in Gaza. The possible exception is if we can identify a location, there are American hostages being held, then we will intervene to try and free those hostages. But I don't think we'll be involved as general combatants in the Gaza operation. I think we're primarily there because the main supporter of Hamas is Iran. And Iran has a proxy militia in Lebanon, which is actually the bigger threat to Israel. I think that our forces are there to ensure that the U.S. citizens in Israel and the U.S. citizens in Lebanon, and there are a lot in both places, don't somehow become hostages if this war spreads. And I think we're there to show Iran that if it orders Hezbollah into the fight, we have the ability to perhaps intervene against that.
Colonel, very quickly, and we're really short of time, but I really want to slip this last question to you once. Now, Blinken has asked China to, use its influence in the Middle East. Now, they have asked them to, influence state and non-state actors. Is this a reference to China having to take some kind of, influence over Iran and Hezbollah from backing off? Do you think China can play any role here? Very quickly, one last question.
If they want to, they can. China is Iran's most reliable trading partner.
So China can play an influence. Thank you so much for joining in, sir.
If they choose to, yes.
If they choose to. All right, Colonel David Deroche, always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining in.
It's an honor. Thank you.
Right.